And I really believe the games have the power to do that. Hi, and welcome back to Quest Markers. On this show, we talk about video games and the stories they tell with a focus on narrative. My name is Marina. I'm an artist, video game composer, audio engineer, and your host. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to recap the last year of Quest Markers, and this is particularly special because we just hit our 1-year anniversary since launching the show. I love December. It's a time of reflection on the last year, and I get particularly pensive around this time of year, so we're going to talk about life lessons from video games. Of course, I have my coffee, I have my water, as always, very predictable of me. We'll be talking about all of the games that we've ever covered on Quest Markers, which are Ocarina of Time, Metroid Dread, Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake, Xenoblade Chronicles 1, NieR Replicant, Breath of the Wild, Pokémon Gold and Silver, Hollow Knight, A Link to the Past, Final Fantasy XIV, Shadowbringers and Endwalker, NieR Automata, Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 remakes, and Majora's Mask. A lot of games today. Quick spoiler disclaimer, there will be spoilers for these games, but the episode is timestamped, so you're welcome to jump around and skip anything that you don't want to or can't listen to right now. There is no guest for today, you're stuck with me, and I wish that we could recap every single little gem from each episode, but I'll keep it to one life lesson per episode, and I'll be sprinkling in my thoughts as well as we do this. And to all of the guests that were generous enough to spend some time recording with me this year, you are all amazing, and I sincerely hope to have you back on the show sometime. Everyone's social links will be in the description. If you're listening, thank you for being here, and let's get into it. Big thank you to my friend Kinsey for being on the very first episode. We talked about Ocarina of Time at length and how this game teaches us that growing up is hard. Aging and finding your place in the world and making sense of the world as you grow older can feel really heavy and disorienting. But no matter how much time passes, your community, the people around you, will always remember how you helped them and how you made them feel. Even if you pull a sword out of a magic temple and disappear for 7 years. This is shown when the people of Hyrule remember Link after the time jump, and Darunia is one of my favorite examples here, where he remembers Link even when you see him again in the Fire Temple. And of course, 7 years prior, you helped clear Dongo's cavern of monsters, allowing the Gorons to eat the rocks from the cavern once again. You didn't just slay a monster, you helped an entire people survive. You helped secure their source of food, and Darunia doesn't forget that. I also love when you clear the forest temple, you get to see Saria again, and she says, quote, "I always believed that you would come because I know you," end quote. Link's only true childhood friend never forgot who he really was, never forgot who he was deep down, and never forgot his courage. And I particularly love this reunion because out of anyone Link knew when he was a kid, he knew Saria best. And getting to see her again was a really pensive moment for me, thinking about all the trials and tribulations that Link had gone through and how much those trials themselves forced him to grow up since he lived in the Kokiri forest. I love Ocarina of Time, and it will always hold a really special place in my heart. Moving on to Metroid Dread. Huge thank you to my friend and game dev Ren for being on this one. We spoke about our mutual love for Samus as a character, and the life lesson we took away from our conversation was that anger can be used productively. It can be used to keep your focus and to survive in extreme situations. In Metroid Dread, we, as Samus, face the X-Parasites, a dangerous organism that can replicate a host's DNA and replicate its form. And they were believed extinct, but Samus is sent to the planet ZDR to eliminate them after the Galactic Federation receives a report that they are still alive and well. Samus fights X-Parasites, Emmy robots, and eventually a powerful Chozo warrior in Dread. And Samus's body language is so expressive in this game. It is very clear that she is a skilled and focused bounty hunter. And the end of the game has one of my favorite moments where she's fighting Ravenbeak, who, side note, calls her his daughter, and it's implied that he gave some of his DNA to Samus years ago to help her survive the harsh conditions of the planet Zebes, but I digress. Moments away from death in this fight with Ravenbeak, Samus awakens as the most powerful Metroid in the universe because she activates and harnesses the Metroid DNA in her. And she uses her sheer rage as a second wind, not only to survive, but to defeat Ravenbeak and, in true Metroid fashion, blow up the planet ZDR, eliminating the last X-Parasites. This game was fantastic, and I really hope that we get to play Metroid Prime 4 soon. Moving on to Episode 3. It was on Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake, and a big thank you to my friend Billy for being on this episode. FF7 teaches us that finding your identity and rebuilding yourself after a traumatic experience is so hard, but that healing is possible and that there is self-acceptance at the end of the road, if only we keep walking. Our protagonist Cloud goes through extreme Mako poisoning and forgets who he is, taking on the memories of who he's always wanted to be, which is a soldier first class, which makes sense given that he wakes up in soldier clothing after this extreme Mako poisoning. His memories are jumbled up after being overexposed to this Mako, and throughout the events of FF7, we see him go from someone with fractured memories to someone who remembers his past, which results in this heartbreaking realization that he never actually reached his ultimate dreams of becoming a soldier first class, or a soldier at all. But this presents an opportunity for him to show himself care and self-acceptance at the end of the game, while also finding the strength to go on and then defeat the man that has been tormenting him and is looking to usher in the end of the world, Sephiroth. I love FF7, and I am so excited for Rebirth next year. Next up, let's talk about what's easily my favorite Xenoblade game, Xenoblade Chronicles 1. Big shout out to my friend and YouTuber/video editor Snugboy for being on this episode. He hates being called a YouTuber, but I need to troll him anyway. I'm so sorry. The lesson I took away from this game is trust your instincts if someone's acting strange. I always had a bad feeling about Dixon. He just was not passing the vibe check for me. But in the misdirect of the century, when you're fighting Egil and then Shulk refuses to end him, and instead, Shulk opts to try and have both sides of the battle between the Bionis and Mechonis understand each other, Dixon shoots Shulk. And it's then revealed that the true antagonist of the game isn't the people of Mechonis, but the god of the Bionis, Zanza, for whom Dixon works. And given that this is a JRPG, it's already a long game, but for this to happen like 30, 40 hours into the game was truly mind-melting, and a good reminder that if someone is acting shady multiple times, it's probably not because they're hiding a surprise birthday party from you. It's probably something a lot more sinister. Next up, big thank you to Mr. Zach Parkerson for coming on to chat about NieR Replicant. Zach is a host of the Gaming Outsider podcast, which you should absolutely check out. I'll link it below. And we spoke about, despite NieR Replicant's story being very, very dark, for me, one of the big lessons that the game highlights is the importance of found family. And Zach and I spoke about how this cast of characters was brought to life so beautifully, and in their travels together, you realize how close they become with each passing day. They, bicker, they don't always agree, but one of the greatest joys in life is being comfortable in other people's company when you care deeply about those people and sticking together through the tough moments. And though NieR and Yona are the ones who are actual siblings, there's a good chunk of the game where Yona goes missing. And NieR, Kaine, Emil, and Weiss, in their travels together, really come to care about each other deeply. And I think the bonds between them are one of the reasons why they were able to continue persevering despite all of the hardships that they faced, including needing to go back to the junk heap 20 million times. I find myself thinking about NieR Replicant a fair bit, and found family is one of my favorite themes in the story. Next up, my friend Ren came back for our Breath of the Wild episode, where we spoke about how we felt that Breath of the Wild was really more Zelda's story than it was Link's. And the story cutscenes reminded us of how heavy the weight of responsibility can be, especially if you're forcing yourself down a path that may or may not be right as you take on that responsibility. And we see this when Zelda puts pressure on herself to awaken her sealing power. She also had added pressure from her father, and all of that was heightened when she started working with and leading Hyrule's chosen champions to avert Calamity Ganon. Ultimately, it led her to try and force her powers to awaken, which led to disappointment after disappointment, especially when we see her praying at the Spring of Power. She pushes and pushes throughout the game, and it culminates into this just heartbreaking moment where she feels like a failure because she can't awaken her power, even though her mother and grandmother could with ease. And instead, what she really wants to do is be an academic and help save the world in that way. And while we're never shown what could have happened if she did take that path, I really can't help but wonder if Calamity Ganon could have been defeated then and there right off the bat, 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, if Zelda was allowed to use her goddess-given wisdom and dedicate it to academia. Our next episode was on a classic Pokemon Gold and Silver, and big thank you to Jack Alex Roberts, a brilliant games journalist, guides writer, and gaming editor, for being on this episode. In this episode, we talked about paving your own narrative and how, despite playing the same story as other players, in this game, you have the power to shape what the experience of that story feels like for you and uniquely you. In Pokemon's case, you decide which Pokemon you start with, you decide which Pokemon you catch or don't catch, you decide which Pokemon you travel with, and you can even decide what order you do some parts of the game, where Chuck, the fighting type gym leader, Jasmine, the steel type gym leader, and Price, the ice type gym leader, can be played in any order. And I played Silver as a kid, and I have such fond memories of the companionship with my little 8-bit pixelated Pokemon. And Jack and I both started with the best starter of all time, of course, Totodile. This was such a fun conversation, and I still hold that game so fondly and so close to my heart. Switching things up, on the next episode, we talked about Hollow Knight. Big thank you to Sherveen, who's a studio founder and game dev, whose latest release, Mid-Autumn, is out now on Steam, which you should check out. To me, the biggest lesson in Hollow Knight is how love changes you. Hollow Knight tells this tragic tale of a powerful bug, the Pale King, trying to find, quote-unquote, the perfect vessel to bring peace to Hallownest by containing the Radiance's corruption. And this perfect vessel would have to be, quote-unquote, hollow, hence the name Hollow Knight. And because the radiance spreads through the minds and dreams of bugs, the Pale King thought, okay, how can we birth a being that is devoid of those things to contain the radiance from making all bugs mindless? So him and his partner had half void, half bug babies in their search for a hollow being. And it is so sad to do that to your children, to try and save the world. But the heartbreaking thing is that when the Pale King found his perfect vessel, he spoke to them about their duty and the importance of that duty. And that's when the vessel, or the Hollow Knight, felt love for his father. And it's implied that this love is what made the Hollow Knight not truly hollow. It was the Hollow Knight's undoing. And it's so ironic that this is the moment that corrupts the Hollow Knight, that love is their undoing. So the lesson for me is that even if you're feeling low and hollow and numb and devoid of feeling, that love can bring you back. Next up, we have A Link to the Past. Big thank you to Scott from the Gaming Outsider podcast for being on the show. Again, you should check them out. I'll have a link below. And my biggest takeaway from A Link to the Past is that there is wonder around every corner if only we look for it. If you've played the game, you know that there are tons of secrets in A Link to the Past. And one of my favorites that I stumbled upon in my wandering was the Waterfall of Wishing, where you can throw in your shield to get the upgraded red shield back, and you can throw your boomerang in to get the magic boomerang back. You can also double your magic meter if you can find a hidden cave and sprinkle some magic powder on a shrine for a bat to appear and double your magic power, which that sounds like the most Zelda thing ever when I say it out loud. Another favorite of mine is that awakening the Flute Boy's bird in Kakariko Village allows you to fast travel, which is super helpful. And you are so well rewarded for having the patience to explore and for holding the belief that there is wonder around every corner. And I think that was the initial intention with the Zelda series. Next up is Final Fantasy XIV and my first solo episode on the Shadowbringers and Endwalker expansions. And this is one of my favorite games, so it was hard to pick one life lesson, but I'll go with an Endwalker one. Endwalker teaches us that when someone has seen so much suffering, that hope becomes incredibly hard to hold on to. But surrounding yourself with people who care about you can help you not only withstand that pain, but persevere and overcome it. We see the Scions hold on to hope the entire time throughout Endwalker, which not only prevents them from becoming blasphemies, but also allows them to tap into their creativity and find a solution to overcome the final days. And most importantly, they do this together by supporting each other. And that perseverance is shown right up until the last battle, when you're fighting the literal incarnation of despair. Right before phase 2 of the Endsinger fight, when the game makes it seem like you failed a party-wide attack, resulting in a wipe, the Scions show up and use the power of Dynamis channeled through their emotions of hope to summon a shield around you and help you carry on. And this theme sounds like it's been done 1,000 times in fantasy stories, but months after finishing Endwalker, I am still so impressed at how the intricate lore not only supports but explains in depth how all of this works in the world. I really think the writing in FF14 is some of the best that I've seen in gaming. The next episode featured my beloved NieR Automata, and it was another solo episode. And once again, this game has so many takeaways and life lessons, but let's talk about the meaning of life, which, not a big topic at all, right? NieR Automata posits that if life is meaningless, then it's our job to create meaning for ourselves, and that meaning is going to look different for everyone. That we ourselves have the agency and the power to create our own meaning and carve our own path in life. And we see that most prominently in the true ending when 2B and 9S break out of the endless cycle of rebirth and death for the androids and machines, where their sole mission was to fight an unwinnable, pre-orchestrated war. As the two androids are being put back together by their pods, the pods say, "A future is not something that is given to you. It is something you must take for yourself," end quote. And it's a brilliant conversation because the two pods talk about how 2B and 9S's memories are now fully restored and that the possibility of them repeating their past mistakes exist. But to end on that hopeful quote is so beautiful and a reminder that all of us have, at any moment, at any point in time, the power to architect our future and thus find our own personal meaning in our lives. Next, we did a special Halloween episode on Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 remakes. Huge thank you to author Thomas Rowland for being on the show. He spoke so beautifully about the narrative in the Resident Evil series. And my favorite topic we spoke about was becoming your own savior when you're thrown in a hopeless situation. In RE0, Rebecca and Billy need to save themselves. In RE1, Jill and Chris need to save themselves when a member of their squad, and their leader nonetheless, is the villain. In RE2, Leon and Claire need to save themselves, and it's poor Leon's first day on the job as a rookie cop. In RE3, Jill and Carlos need to save themselves, and Leon needs to save himself in RE4 while also saving Ashley, who in turn saves Leon too. And side note, I love how Leon just becomes a dad in both RE2 and RE4. It's so wholesome. But Thomas put this so beautifully, so I'll quote him directly from the episode. I hope he doesn't mind. He says, quote, In RE1, all of the documents you find are of people losing hope. Everywhere you go, everything is falling apart. A lot of the documents you find in RE1 are to a lover or a family member in a last desperate plea, and they give their final moments. And it's harrowing witnessing all those last moments of hope. You see this hope fleeting, and you're expected to push through. You have to survive, you have to keep going. And throughout the games, you do have moments where you are saved by happenstance or you do get lucky breaks. Barry Burton is the best reflection of these moments. He will save you a couple of times, but a lot of the time, you're relying on yourself. And as you're going through the game, as it culminates to the end, you're not saved by some great event. You, in the end, have to save yourself. It's a journey of keeping your own hope alive and rekindling your hope and becoming the savior you need. End quote. Oh, that's so good. I have absolutely nothing to add because that was perfect. Just perfectly said. And lastly, our 1-year anniversary episode that came out last month on Majora's Mask. Huge thank you to my friend Kinsey for being on this episode. We spoke about a lot of topics, but what I wanted to touch on here was how overcoming grief isn't linear, and that moving through and overcoming grief typically happens in 5 fluid stages, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We see this as Link progresses through the lands of Termina. In Clocktown, we see denial. In Woodfall, we see anger. In Snowhead, we see bargaining. In the Grey Bay, we see depression. And in Ikana, we see acceptance. And again, Kinsey beautifully reminds us that this healing doesn't happen in a linear progression. You move through the stages with fluidity as you process. And we also spoke about how grief maybe never truly goes away, with the Stone Tower Temple being a representation of that. When you acquire the light arrows, which to me represent enlightenment and acceptance, you're able to use them to flip the temple upside down, which symbolically shows you bringing grief, this thing that's been weighing so heavily on you, above you, overpowering you, to your feet. And by bringing the heavens to your feet, you symbolically bring grief to your feet as well, to walk beside you and to have less power over you. I love that game so much. I love all of the games that we spoke about this year. And what a year it's been. Thank you again to everyone who's ever joined me to talk about video games. They are such a beautiful art form, and each and every one of you spoke so beautifully about them. So what's in store for next year? Expect more conversations, more discussions on narratives in video games, more guests with friends and game devs, more solo episodes. And this all goes for both games that have come out recently and ones that came out a while ago. If there's something you really want to see, or rather hear this upcoming year, please send us a message or send me a message personally. All social links will be below. I'm currently playing Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, but already have guests lined up for some exciting new episodes in 2024. And beyond anything, thank you so much for listening and being here. I love making this show, and it means the world to me that anyone listens. And if something we've ever covered on the show has somehow helped you make meaning of something in your life in any way, I'm so glad, and I really believe that games have the power to do that. Lastly, if there's anyone you think might like this episode, send it over their way. If you're not subscribed or following along, please do if you'd like to, so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a beautiful day. Thanks again, and see you next time.